Welcome to Soul Night Live, episode number 121. Today, my co host is Vaylor Trucks, and our guest is Jeff Skunk Baxter. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. I thought we'd get started with what you've been up to lately. I see you've been doing some excellent live shows. I was curious if there's going to be more of those coming up. And if you could tell us a bit about your most recent solo album, The Speed of Heat, we'd love to hear about that as well.
I mean, where would you like me to start?
Well, tell us about the tour. Is there going to, or is this just sporadic dates, or is it a tour, and will there be more of them?
We usually go out for about 2 weeks at a time, and we're going to go out again in June. Yeah, because number one, I've got my day job, working with the government. I have to make time for that. But yeah, we've been out. Wow, we've been out a number of times. We even went to Japan. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. I've never done a solo album. I've never done a solo tour. I've always been with someone else's band or a band that I've been, a member of. It's a great experience. It's also interesting to be the focus of the music, which being a studio musician, I don't know, I'm not sure that's in my psychological profile, but it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I was wondering what was the inspiration to do the solo album after all these years?
Just seemed like the right time. Uh, it's hard to say. I wasn't sitting somewhere and got a bolt from the blue, but time to do a solo album. But a number of folks had been curious why I hadn't done one. And usually it's because there just wasn't enough time to put something together that I thought would be of the kind of quality I wanted. And frankly, with a friend of mine and great producer and keyboard player and composer, C.J. Vanston, we'd been working together on bits and pieces of it for years. And finally, we just got to the point where, whoa, wait a minute. It's like pennies in a jar, I guess. You get to the point where you got to roll them up.
Sure.
Because there you go. So we kind of got to that point.
Well, excellent. Where's the best place to get it at?
I believe you can get it on Apple Music, Spotify,
The
um,
usual, the usual suspects.
the usual suspects, I guess, yes.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, I encourage you all to go check it out. It's called The Speed of Heat.
Oh,
And
yes. And let me just to interject for just a second
sure.
and be perhaps fulfill my role as fanboy on this operation. Having listened to the album several times now, it it occurs to me that it crystallized what I've always enjoyed about what you do, which is a lot of guitar players, when they play, they find their voice and they stick to that tone and that style. But I really, really respect someone like you or Steve Morse who can master a wide range of different tones, different styles, different instruments, and make them their own. And Speed of Heat does that masterfully. I was kind of gobsmacked by how far afield you go in the sonic landscape to put these songs together. So I wanted to extend my appreciation for what you accomplished there.
Well, thank you. And that I actually I do appreciate that because there were people when I first started thinking about this who said, "Oh, no, 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 no! You have to, one thing, one theme. Nobody will ever like it." And I'm thinking, well, really? That's uh, I don't play the same style of guitar for Dolly Parton that I do for Rod Stewart. So what am I missing here?
Right.
Um, so I figured, okay, better to be true. And also, I want to have fun. I want to, I would like to, and the object was to try to communicate, as all musicians do, in as many different languages as I could. I mean, I speak more than one language myself, so I don't know, just made sense to me. And I'm glad you liked it because I guess what that means is that you've been able to enjoy a a different emotional package on many different levels. And
There is that, and there's also just the artisan's appreciation for something well made, you know? So,
oh, well, thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
You did a couple Steely tunes and kind of redid them. What was your vision to change them?
Well, my old school, and of course, I forgot to put down that I sang it.
Okay.
I forgot that on the liner notes. Um, I had sang that song live with Steely Dan for years. And I got to the point where every time we played the song, it was had a little more energy, a little more rambunctious, because it's a rockin' tune.
Oh yeah.
And the version that we did in Steely Dan is a fine version. But it seemed to me that there was some more potential with that piece of music to kind of ramp it up. And so I cut a scratch track, vocal track, sent it to Steve Tyler. And because I said, Steve, I'd like you to sing this. And he said, well, yeah, but who's singing it? And he said, well, I just put down a scratch vocal, so you knew where it was. And he went, well, why don't you sing it? I said, come on, Steve, man. I'm not a singer. I'm a guitar player. What I do. He said, don't be silly. Go for it. So are you kidding me? I said, no, man. Go for it. So I took the shot and knock on wood, nobody's yelled at me yet for saying, wow, that really sucks. Um, and as far as Do It Again was concerned, that was just a fun exercise. In the same way as in Steely Dan, we took the Duke Ellington song, East St. Louis Toodleoo,
Hmm.
uh, and each of us took one of the solo instruments and uh, repackaged it, if you will.
Yeah,
Uh,
you were Bubber Miley's trombone, if I remember right. Is that right?
right. And I thought, okay, well, what's the most difficult uh, thing I can come up with? I think I'll just transpose it for pedal steel. And number one, it's a challenge, and I do like a challenge. And number two, it was the only instrument I could think of that I could slide like a trombone.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, then this is what this calls for. And we did that with Do It Again. The idea was, well, okay, what if you took the song, turned it upside down, inside out, changed it from 4/4 to 6/8? What would happen? And I love the way that came out. It's just a kind of a greasy, slidey kind of version of the song. And it has a nice groove. I love shuffles.
Oh yeah. I
I
do
love
too.
the shuffle feel a lot.
Oh yeah, it's like the funnest groove to play over.
I think so.
Yeah, it really is. It just has this forward momentum that makes it really exciting. Well, those are great choices. My old school is just a banger. I mean, even when you go see Steely, it's like it's one of the songs that just has this energy to it. And there were a number of ones from the albums that you were on that approached that as well. I think later they settled into more of kind of a laid back funk thing, and that's beautiful too. But some of those earlier songs just have an energy that I think was kind of polished off later.
Well, everybody, I think everybody should progress. We certainly in the Doobie Brothers there were more. When I brought Mike McDonald into the band, there were people that were very angry.
Well, yeah, they still are. You hear
Yeah,
about them on the internet. It's like, and they can stuff it.
and that's fine, but that's like being angry at your kids for growing up. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Uh, if you are a good musician, I think you have an obligation, in a sense, to progress, because for yourself, you're obligated. It's like the priesthood. There's no end It's just the journey and it's the learning process. I'm sure Fleetwood Mac had the same problem. And people were angry because this new Fleetwood Mac wasn't like the old Fleetwood Mac. But okay, it's everybody has a right to feel and have their opinion, and that's okay with me. It was interesting that the band, the Doobie Brothers, went from selling maybe 5 or 6 million albums to 11 million albums. So somebody somewhere must have been okay with it.
Yeah, they obviously liked it a lot.
And so with Steely Dan, Walter Becker and Donald Fagen had a desire to be more, I guess, be more in control of everything because they were the songwriters, and that's their right, and fair enough.
Yeah.
Besides, I was playing in about 4 different bands at the same time: Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, Linda Ronstadt, going on. So fine, it gives me a little more time here, to do what I want to do.
When they were heading towards this kind of all studio approach, did you kind of see it coming?
Yeah, in a sense, it wasn't so much the all studio approach, because I have no problem with that. I mean, I being a studio rat myself, for my God, over 55 years as a studio musician.
Goodness.
I think the thing that sort of changed how I wanted to participate was that they didn't want to tour. And I think that again, there's no one's obligated to do anything. But I've played so many live shows with so many different folks. There's something really special about playing live,
Sure.
performing. And I think people like that and they would like to see that. And it's interesting that after Walter and Donald went through their I only want to be in the studio, they started touring again. So,
Yeah.
okay, fair enough. Sometimes it takes people a little while to learn what reality is. And people appreciate that you're willing to put the time and effort to perform. And I think it's part of a learning experience. The Minute by Minute album with the Doobies grew out of what we were doing in the tours just before. So it's like if you're a doctor, once you graduate from medical school, you don't stop learning. Not good, no good. So I think that being a musician is the same way, and you're playing live gives you a tremendous opportunity to gauge people's feelings.
Sure.
If you want to, if part of what your objective is to make people happy. Now that's not your only objective because you have to be true to yourself too. And it's a fine line. There's no either or.
So how did you come to hook up with Donald and Walter? And you'd moved out to LA to do some session work, am I right?
Yeah, but I'd worked with them before.
Oh, yeah, you knew them before you went to LA. Okay.
Yeah.
How did you initially meet them?
Well, I was living in Boston. I was doing a lot of session work, actually, commuting between Boston and New York City. And I spent a lot of time in a studio called Intermedia Sound in Boston on Newbury Street. And I found myself hanging out at that studio a lot and working because people would come in and they go, well, we need a guitar player. Well, okay. There's a guy, okay. So I found myself doing a bunch of stuff, Jonathan Edwards, Paul Pina, different artists. And there was a band called the Bead Game. They were friends of mine because I had played with them when I was playing in Boston bands like the Ultimate Spinach and the Holy Modal Rounders and Tim Buckley. I'd met them through just the Boston music scene. And their producer was Gary Katz, who eventually ended up producing Steely Dan. And I stuck my head in, and I guess, I met Gary. Hello, how are you? Kind of, welcome to Newberry, to Intermediate Sound. And then I was doing a session, and I'm trying to remember who it was with, when Gary stuck his head in the studio. And afterwards he said, listen, I've got a project I'm doing in New York for a lady named Linda Hoover, that I've got a couple of songwriters writing much of the material for. Would you consider coming down to New York and working on the record? And I said, sure. I mean, that's sort of that's in my wheelhouse. Get on a train, head down, do the work, come back. So that's what I did. And afterwards, I'd done 3 or 4 or 5 songs, and Walter and Donald said, hey, we've never heard anybody play guitar like that on our material. And I said, well, I've never heard material like this. This is pretty good. And the idea was a sort of, okay, whoever gets an opportunity to pull something together, get on the phone and let's figure it out, sort of waiting for it to happen. So Becker and Fagen got a publishing deal with ABC Dunhill Records in Los Angeles. And as soon as they got there, they said, okay, let's do a band. So they called me, and they said, well, do you know any great drummers? I said, yeah, Jimmy Hodder, who was the drummer in the Bead Game. And do you know any great singers? Yeah, David Palmer from the Middle Class, because Rikki Philp was a friend of mine, a great guitar player. I'd met him through Dan Armstrong when I was working in Dan's shop in New York City. So it's a kind of this whole, the way the musicians in music works is it's connected to this way, this person talks to this guy, worked with him and this guy, and so on and so forth. So that's how the band ended up forming, literally rehearsing in the office of the president of ABC Records.
Nice.
And we would rehearse at night, clean up our stuff so that Jay Lasker and Howard Stark didn't know, because we didn't have any other place to rehearse. So one day, we kind of let things go a little bit, and Jay Lasker, the president of ABC Records, walked in and went, what the hell is this? Because there was, beer bottles and gear and stuff. And Gary Katz said, well, there's this band. And Jay, being the consummate, ultimate record guy, besides being a wonderful person, one of these, all right, kid, let's see what you got kind of guys. So we did. And he went, all right, I'll sign it. Okay.
Awesome.
Great. Now what? Well, here's your record contract. Here's he wrote me a check for $1,000 and said, go get a nice apartment, get your girlfriend out here. And I thought, wow, $1,000? Wow, that's amazing. That was back in 1970,
Yeah.
so.
You'd go pretty far back then.
Well, that was a tremendous opportunity. I mean, he didn't have to do it, but that's how it all started. And then we were trying to figure out a name for the band, which was always difficult.
Right.
So we boiled it down to either Big Nardo in the 8th grade or Steely Dan. And we figured that Big Nardo in the 8th grade wouldn't fit really on an album cover.
Right.
So we went with Steely Dan.
Okay.
It came from William Burroughs' novel Naked Lunch. And we were fans because we were all East Coast guys. I went to prep school, all that kind of stuff, where, English literature and writing was a, focus. And so we'd all read most of Henry Miller's stuff. We'd all read, Thomas Pynchon. We'd all read um, um, uh, Naked Lunch, William Burroughs' stuff, poetry of Allen Ginsberg. It was that time of the season, shall we say?
Yeah.
So yeah, we were all familiar with it.
Okay. How did the title "Can't Buy a Thrill" come about?
That I'm not sure. I think that's just something that that I think Walter might have come up with that.
Okay. And when did Denny get involved? And tell me about meeting him for the first time. Did you guys hit it off straight away?
Yeah, when we finally put this band together, I mean, we had done we had the rhythm section, and so we all kind of agreed. I mean, it just happened that everybody played and everybody went, yeah, this is great. I think all of us picked each other rather well. How the Mark Volman and Howard Kalin from the Turtles were coming in to help us with background vocals on the demos that we were doing for ABC when we were in the song, in the development mode. But no, it really clicked. I think, I mean, you listen to the first record, Can't Buy a Thrill, that came out pretty well.
Oh yeah, and such an eclectic record. I'd say Pretzel's probably almost as eclectic as well, but definitely there's a lot of variety on that one. And you recorded all the 3 albums that you did with them at Village Recorders, is that right?
Some of the work we did at Cherokee, and some of the work we did in the studio at ABC Records on Beverly, but most of it was done at the Village.
What was the inspiration to go with Village, in a town that's full of studios? What did you like about that one so much?
I'm not sure. I don't know what the inspiration was. The fact that the call came, okay, we're all, we're going to be down at the Village.
Hmm.
Okay. I was very familiar with the place. I'd done tons of recording there anyway. So, and the owner or the studio manager, I think might have been friends with Gary Katz. I'm not sure. But be that as it may, they opened up the kimono and said, come on in. We kind of took up residency there for a little while. So it was a mutual agreement of let's go to the Village.
Okay. And I imagine they had a backlog of songs to go with. Did anything materialize once the band was together, or was it all stuff that they had demoed previously that you decided to record and put on the first record?
On the first record, I believe there was a fair amount of material. When we got to Countdown to Ecstasy, I think they had much of it done, but they were still in the writing process.
Was the band able to kind of interject some parts in there? I mean, besides just icing the cake, did you guys have some composition?
Well, when it came to when you say parts, yeah, my guitar solos came from me, and my rhythm parts came from me. It was a band where everyone was expected, I believe, to contribute. Was there always 100% agreement? No, and that's good. And being a studio musician myself, yeah, object is to get it right and to get it, this is grammatically incorrect, but to get it best, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of creative conversation, but ultimately you were responsible for your parts. Then later on, I think after the Pretzel Logic, Becker and Fagen had a tendency to, what was the word, exercise their studio musicians to the point where if they had been able to execute the instrument to the proficiency that reflected those that they called into play, they would have done it themselves.
Right.
Well, it seemed like had a relentless pursuit of perfection. But do you think things can almost get a little too perfect? I'm kind of thinking of the quantizing of the drums and all that by the time the decade ended. It's like, yeah, it's perfect, but is that groove really better?
Well, I mean, you can go back and forth on this.
Right.
Yes and no. I think that in terms of can things get too perfect? Yes, because there were guitar solos, there were performances, vocal performances, and performances by other musicians that I think ultimately were better performances than eventually were chosen. Not a lot, but a few. But now you can get into the argument, can a drum machine groove? Was Wendell as in the pocket as Jim Gordon or Jeff Porcaro or Ed Green, or Vinnie Colaiuta, Carlos Vega, all the guys that we work with in the studio. I would argue that, again, it's a question of the overall product because of the strictness of the time and feel, it created for itself a genre. I think Walter and Donald embraced it and used it as a platform to create. And it's hard to argue with the result. I would make the same argument when I went in to do the first Donna Summer album as a guitar player. The drummer was a live drummer, Keith Forsey. He was like Ed Green. It was a machine, but he was a live drummer. But then that began to evolve into, drum machines. And I started to do some different records, disco type records, and found some of them to be really satisfying. So I don't know. I don't know. Can you groove on an arpeggiator? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not? And what's your problem?
Yeah.
Is it that you don't like the process and therefore it biases you for the product? Yeah, it doesn't work for me.
Fair enough. Well, I think every approach is legit in the right context. And I think things were kind of heading that way with the 80s anyway. And of course, nowadays, everything's on the grid, It's, so.
Well, it's an interesting, it's like any technology is a double-edged sword. I mean, take nuclear fission, for instance. You can heat a home or you can leave a huge smoking crater.
Yeah.
It's really how you apply it. So I think it's the same thing. On the one hand, the recording business was stuck in its own rut in a way that nobody could afford to rent a studio. Very expensive. I mean, $300 an hour, $400 an hour. That was really out of the reach of the average musician. So they had to go to a record company who had enough money to have a budget to be able to, except for rare cases.
Yep.
So here was a situation where there was a little lack of freedom, was confined and constrained. Then in the 80s, two things happened. One was drum machines, and the other was the TIAC Corporation came out with a 4-track, multi-track machine that you could overdub on, and it was inexpensive enough so that you could keep it in your home. There was a Doobie Brothers song that we did that we ended up using the track that we cut in my living room with myself and Michael because we couldn't recreate it. So I guess, is it legitimate? Did I have to pay $300 an hour? No, it was in my apartment in Hollywood. Chizo drum machine, kind of a cheap little keyboard, but hey, so that opened the door. So it was, in a sense, it freed musicians to have the ability to create using the tools that were formerly out of their reach. And then, of course, in came the disco era, and then the advent of Apple computers, which were designed in many ways to be music friendly. I worked a lot with Apple back in the day on the music interfaces with that. And then the next thing you know, there's a whole genre of music where people are taking cassettes, dumping them onto other cassettes, recording on, one track, getting a cheap drum machine, and selling millions of records. It was like, okay, now it's music to the people, power to the people. Anybody can do this.
Yeah, the playing field was leveled.
Yeah, now that doesn't mean that every piece of music that resulted from that was a gem. Far from it.
No.
But it opened up, I think, for the best. It freed people's creative. It took, and this is going to sound really provincial, it took making music out of a privileged class.
I agree with that so
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. Yes.
It gave it to everybody. And I remember those early cassette machines. I mean, that was kind of a revelation. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, I can actually make music at home. I don't have to go to a studio. And that was a great thing.
I had a Fostex 4-track in my day for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic machine.
Yeah.
There are even people who manufacture electronics that are designed to mimic the recording profile of those machines.
Oh, wow.
Go figure.
Yeah. So I was wondering about your solos on the Steely records. Were they all spontaneous, or did you kind of compose them in advance, or did it depend on the song?
It depends on the song.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, East St. Louis Toodleoo, I had to shed that one.
Oh, I can
I
imagine.
wrote it out, My Old School zipped right through. Rikki, Don't Lose That Number. I thought about it beforehand. In my head, I composed it. Because I think, frankly, a good guitar solo should be a composition that can stand alone.
Sure.
That fits into, it's like a beautiful stained glass window that fits into a beautiful building. It's all designed to complement each other, but that can stand alone.
Okay.
So yeah, there were some times where you just zip through. Sometimes it took a lot of time.
Well, the first four bars of that solo, especially, the descending bends, switching from the minor to the major right for the last bar. That's one of those things like no one thought to do that before, and yet it's been right there the whole time. I really appreciate that.
Well, no, I did give that some thought because I wanted it to start out with a blues feel, because the song itself was not obvious. Lyrically, it wasn't obvious. And as far as I thought the solo should make people comfortable. Hey, it's something that you can understand. Pentatonic scale, a little bit of blues for everybody. Then when it goes to the next section, now I'm playing chord substitutions.
Right.
And now we're in the world of maybe jazz improvisation, and looking to bend and explore the tonality like a good jazz musician should over a theme. So yeah, that was pretty thought out.
Oh,
It's a good one.
Such a classic. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Just aside, you mentioned Volman earlier. I was curious, when you guys were out in LA, did you ever run into Frank Zappa? And was he an inspiration on Steely Dan at all?
I'd met Frank a few times, but I don't, to my knowledge, wasn't a particular influence on any of us.
Mm.
But I can't speak. I can only speak for myself.
Okay, well, fair enough. Yeah, well, so it was a big scene back then, and
Yeah.
thought you guys might have bumped into each other occasionally.
Well, I think one of the things that Frank did was he brought a strong discipline to music that people may have thought was undisciplined. You listen to the Mothers of Invention, and some people think it's just kind of nuts. Well, I'm sure the first time somebody heard Charlie Parker or Dizzy Gillespie play, they went, "What the hell is that?"
Sure.
Yep.
But it was disciplined, and it was organized, and it was focused. And maybe that set an example for a band like Steely Dan to not be afraid, embarrassed, or somehow feel outcast because the music was well thought out and organized.
Yeah, the attention to detail. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
I have no problem with that.
no.
I like that.
Love it. Yeah, definitely. I was curious. Do you remember the first show you played with Steely Dan? Remember where it was? And
I believe the first show we played was in a club called Under the Ice House in Pasadena. Um, we played 2 or 3 shows there. It was our first performance. And the opening act was Fanny,
oh, nice.
who if you ever, I don't know if you've seen that documentary, The Right to Rock, but it's fabulous. And I remember walking out of a sound check, walking out of the club and hearing this just awesome slide guitar playing. And I turned around, it was June. It's June Millington. And so I spoke to Lowell George. I said, have you heard this lady play slide? Because Lowell's a fine slide player
Oh, yeah.
with little feet. And he came down the first day, Steely Dan. But I said, you got to come early and listen to this girl play, this lady, this person. Blew his mind.
Mm.
So that whole time frame stays in my mind very vividly.
And did you guys go out on tour shortly after that? And were you
Yes.
a support
Yeah.
act? And who was it for?
I think we went out with the James Gang
Oh,
with Joe
wow.
Walsh.
Yeah.
But the first shows we did were in Texas. where we sort of broke the band. I mean, go figure, Steely Dan, Texas, okay, playing Liberty Hall in Houston, and the opening act was a band called Navasota, which was a Texas band. And it worked. I mean, who knew?
What were some of the other double bills? It seems like a lot of these 70s double bills were often kind of, an interesting variety. It's like King Crimson with Black Oak, Arkansas is one that comes to mind. It's like,
Right.
how did this ever happen? But it did. I was curious if you guys had any moments like that.
Well, I think part of it was a product of the structure and the architecture of booking bands, where there was an agency. They called them booking agents, or a group of folks who specialized in putting bands in venues. And so those agencies would have a number of artists on their roster. And so they would suggest to the record company, hey, what would happen if you put Steely Dan together with, the James Gang? Well, that sounds like a good idea. What would happen if you put Steely Dan together with the Doobie Brothers? Okay. And there was a lot of that. That's one of the reasons why I sort of transitioned, playing in two bands at the same time. It offered opportunities. Steely and the Doobie Brothers played with the Beach Boys, and the Beach Boys played with Chicago, and Chicago played with the Doobie Brothers, and I'm sure there was some thought put into that. There were also some business considerations, obviously, but I think it was just a product of the dynamics of it all.
Something else I was kind of curious about. I mean, just the thought of Doobies and Steely together is like peanut butter and jelly. That just seems like it's a perfect match. I've always wondered this because a lot of people go, "Oh, what's another band that's like Steely Dan?" And it's like it's a damn short list as far as I can tell. But the first one that comes to mind is Michael era Doobies and probably like Boss Skaggs. Do you think the time that Michael spent in Steely Dan affected his approach to harmony? Because I hear a lot of these big chords, kind of Steely-esque chords in a lot of the Doobie era stuff that he did. And I'm just wondering if that was something that he just kind of knew about anyway, or if Becker and Fagen kind of had inspiration on his approach to harmony.
Well, I think we're all products of our past influences. I hope so.
Oh, yeah.
You're paying attention, you are, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And when I think one of the, digress for a second, I think one of the best Doobie Brothers albums ever was Living on the Fault Line. And most people will go, what the hell was that? Well, when you listen to that record from a sort of an objective, scholarly, if there's such a thing, point of view, you listen to the harmonies, you listen to all of that, and you begin to see what the genesis of Minute by Minute was. I don't think the Doobies could have done that record without doing Living on the Fault Line. And there was definitely some Steely Dan influence. I mean, I went to Ted Templeman. I said, I think the Doobies should work as a rhythm section. I think we should book them to play with Carly Simon and Hoyt Axton and Leo Sayer. 9 o'clock in the morning downbeat. They don't care what band you're in. You play it right or you're fired. Okay. That creates, for me, that kind of discipline was what I grew up with in the studios. What would happen if we infused that kind of discipline into the Doobie Brothers, all of whom were fantastic musicians, to the point where maybe they hadn't been able to develop or have the opportunity to realize their own potential. And I do remember during the Minute by Minute album, no, during the Living on the Fault Line album, Keith Knudsen, a fine drummer. Because remember, the Doobies were sort of known as a rollicking, rockin' band, which is fine, absolutely. But I do remember in the Living on the Fault Line, then when Keith said, you know, I dropped a snare drum beat in bar 51.
Hmm.
I went, bingo, welcome to my world, you know, and that kind of discipline. And the reason I say that is because the experimental music on Living on the Fault Line, especially harmonic and vocally, there's some very different stuff on that. I think laid the groundwork for that. And Michael was very influential in the vocal harmonies on that. He and Pat spent a lot of time working that stuff out.
You reminded me of story. I don't know if you know this about me or not, but my father was Butch Trucks of the Allman Brothers band, and he was giving a clinic here in town. The three drummers of the Allman Brothers, and Butch Trucks and J-Mo and Mark Quinones, who is now with the Doobie Brothers. The question came up about influences, and my dad said, you know, his influences were like Elvin Jones and Pat Morello, and Mark had mentioned Tito Puente and some other salsa dura, and J-Mo, when he got the mic, he said, everyone I've ever heard has influenced me, even if it's just to say I don't want to sound like that.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever do any bills with the Allman Brothers back in the day?
I don't recall.
I think they may have missed each other, because Allman Brothers they were playing stadiums in 73, 74, and by 76 they were broken up. So I think you may have passed in the night.
I know I sat in with the Allman Brothers a number of times, but just personally, not
right.
Not as the Doobie Brothers.
Okay, very interesting. I wanted to go back to Steely for a minute and ask you about a few songs, and just if you have any memories of how they came together and their inspirations and such. First one that comes to mind is King of the World. That's one of my favorites, and that's a track I think a lot of people would consider a deep cut, but such an energetic tune. It's live, you guys just burned through it. It was amazing. I was wondering if you remember how that came together at all.
Same way as everything else did. Let's take it, here's the song. Let's play it. Everybody, jumped in. I like that track. I've been getting a lot of calls from folks who have said, tell me about the Boston Rag. And I kind of went back and listened to that. That was like a symphonic composition in different parts. It was like Beethoven's Sixth, where it had very, very different pieces to it. And then I listened to the guitar solo in that, and I like that guitar solo.
Is that
a
you?
lot. Yeah, I like that because I just finished. I build guitars and customize electronics and stuff. So I had just done I'd gone out to Fender out in Corona, dumpster dived, and found a Telecaster body that I liked, and then took it back and installed some Skunk Sonic pickups on it. And that was the first time I got a chance to use that guitar. So the tone of that guitar is very personal.
Hmm.
What guitars did you mainly focus on back in Steely? Or did you use quite a variety, or was there like a handful of like your mainstays?
I had a Les Paul that I liked. I played occasionally, but most of the guitars that I used were guitars that I made. Uh, the guitar on my old school, for instance, I had literally finished routing that out in the parking lot at Valley Sound because I was working out there fixing guitars and designing custom electronics for guitars. Literally, I'd routed it out, put the electronics in, bolted it together, and taken it into the studio. And I ended up using that for a lot of shows. I used a Les Paul uh, live a fair amount, and that Stratocaster and the Baxter caster that I had designed. Um, I think I put a little too much paint remover on it because one day the guitar delaminated.
Oh,
But thank God for gaffer's tape, right?
no.
Yeah.
How heavy are those Lucite guitars? I've always wanted to know.
Yeah, I got to ask, did they inspire you sitting down on stage, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, sitting down on stage makes perfect sense to me. Um, I sit down in the studio. Every time you buy a guitar, and I worked in a lot of music stores, everybody sat down for their first, when they tried out the guitar. And then when I was working at Darren Armstrong's guitar shop in Boston, in New York, it was an interesting setup. We had the back room where we did all the repair. We had the front room that had a couple of sofas and chairs and amps. And we spent, I don't know, maybe 3 hours a day fixing guitars and the rest of it hanging out with Eddie Deal and Sam Brown and, Mike Bloomfield, and everybody was just coming in. We were hanging. We wanted to play. Danny was a great player, by the way. Dan Armstrong, a fine guitar player. So one day, Andre Segovia came into the store because he was playing a concert and he had broken one of the tuning machines on his Ramirez. And so somebody had said, yeah, Dan Armstrong that's where you go to get your guitar repaired, which it was. We were the only guitar repair shop within, I guess hundreds of miles. So he brought it in. I looked at it and I went, oh, crap. So I ran across the street to Charles Ponte. Because remember, on 48th Street, there were a number of music stores: Manny's, Jimmy's, Ben's, Charles Ponte, Terminal. I mean, all the stores were there. Charles Ponte was a violin and cello repair shop. And so I went over there and I thought, oh, God, maybe. And he had a set of very, very high-end classical guitar tuning machines. One set. So I bought them, went back, took the Ramirez, installed, I replaced one side because you couldn't replace them. There were groups of three.
Yeah.
Tuned it up, took it out. Meanwhile, out in the front room, Mike Bloomfield, Frank Zappa, Eddie Deal, and Sam Brown were all out there rocking and having it. And I don't know if you know who Sam Brown or Eddie Deal. Eddie Deal was the best bebop guitar player I ever heard in my life. And Sam Brown was a frightening guitar player who, New York guy. Again, these guys are just, it's hard to describe the level of cosmic guitarness that they personified. Sam was playing with Gary Burton at the time. So anyway, they're out there playing away, and Andre Segovia is sitting quietly on the sofa, kind of watching what's going on here. And so I brought his instrument. I said, hey, guys, hold on a second. Stand by. And they're all standing up, right? For some reason, everybody's like, I don't know. Or a couple of them are standing up, a couple of them are sitting down. And so I handed the guitar to Mr. Segovia, who tuned it up. And sitting there on the sofa, played the first 64 bars of the Concerto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo. And I mean, it's like the movies where all the lighting disappears and there's one beam, you know. It was mesmerizing. And everybody in the room was taken. And then Andre Segovia, because I grew up in Mexico City, so as a kid. So in Spanish, Andre Segovia said, please tell them that you don't hang it around your neck like a canoe paddle. So I relayed that to my compatriots, and they all sat down. And he explained in Spanish, and I would translate it, that he felt that the instrument was necessary for the instrument to be close to your heart, close to you, and that was as important as your playing technique. And he's right. And I remember I did a Showtime special with B.B. King once, who was a friend, and he had a knee operation, and so he had to sit down. And after the sound check, he said, Skunk, if I had only known how cool this is, I would have been doing this from the beginning. I said, baby, I'm just telling you, way to go, babe.
I can see that. I mean, I personally feel more connected when I'm sitting down. I almost feel like I can concentrate better. I don't know.
And that's not to say I didn't run around on stage a lot, because we had one of the things in Steely Dan, there wasn't a lot of personal energy. So I tried as best I could to, personify that as much as I can.
Have you seen any of the recently uncovered Midnight Special footage of you?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that awesome? It looks like it was filmed yesterday. That brings back a lot of memories, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely, including when I was playing with Linda Ronstadt and Paulino da Costa, who's got to be one of the greatest percussionists on the planet, first call studio guy, didn't make it to the show. Well, what are you going to do? So I ended up playing congas.
So I've seen you Do It Again, so I know you.
So I played drums for years too. So I even played drums in the Doobies live for about a third of the show, towards the end of it. Which, yeah, I love looking back at that, because that starts to bring all kinds of memories. Because I was in the house band for a while at the Midnight Special, where wow. we would be start at 8 o'clock in the morning for the solo artists, and then the bands would come on in the evenings, and then when they put it all together, they take the audience from the band performances and put it all together. Number one, I thought Bert Sugarman was a wonderful human being.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. For the vision that he had and the way he did it, working for him was great. Always look forward to it. It was a slog. I mean, we're working 7 hours, 8 hours a day here on this show, but he was a fantastic human being.
That's wonderful to hear. I always like when I hear that someone that influential turns out to be a good person.
One of the clips I've seen recently is you playing the Black Les Paul on Showbiz Kids. Mm-hmm. I was curious, was that tune in a special tuning, or was it just standard?
Yeah, it was tuned to an open E. And actually, I think that guitar was made by the Acoustic Corporation, who built the amplifiers.
Sure.
It was called a Black Widow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was, if I remember correctly, it was a double cutaway black guitar with 2 single coil pickups that the guys at Acoustic had given me. It was their attempt, a good one, at building guitar, like custom amplifiers. They also built what turned out to be a very fine guitar. Very few of them, but very fine guitar. Had the Allman 2000 pickups in it, which was my favorite all-time guitar pickup anyway. So, but yeah, that was a Black Widow.
Okay. Well, that's amazing footage. I just love that. Taylor, you got a question?
Oh my gosh, so many. But I'm not gonna I'm not going to take advantage of your time too much. There are two key memories of you during my childhood, and the first is that my mom's younger brother was a huge fan of Ultimate Spinach. And so growing up, I heard the Ultimate Spinach 3 album at least once a week. What was it like joining that band? How did you get that gig?
Well, I was working at Jack's Drum Shop in Boston, repairing guitars and selling guitars.
Hmm.
You know, just working in the music store. And the leader of the band, Ian Bruce Douglas, came into the store and said, "Do you know of any guitar players that are looking for a gig?" So I said, "Yeah, me." Hopped over the counter, and that was it.
Wow. It's such a fun album, and that just like Romeo and Juliet is a cool tune. It's
What
like I
a
say,
great song.
it's a key part of my childhood.
And we had a minor hit with that, actually, because
Yeah.
that was a great tune. That was one of my favorite songs ever. Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
wow. And the other key memory was I was a big fan of the show What's Happening, and of all the bands to show up on that show, it's the Doobie Brothers. How did that come about?
I think it was a a pleasant and a successful outcome of a corporate marriage.
Mm,
At about that time, one of the issues was the bootlegging of music. And the record companies were very aware of that. And I believe that as I think that was part of it. The idea, number one, is how do we showcase a band like the Doobie Brothers in different media? Not the Midnight Special, but something else. And somebody came up with the idea, oh, well, what we'll do, we'll have the Doobie Brothers play on What's Happening, and we will cast Rerun as a bootlegger,
yep.
you know, and then we will bring home the message that no, 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 that is bad juju. And that's, I think, how that came about. Now,
Yeah.
if you look at that, since you're familiar with it, you can probably go back and look at it again. It's probably somewhere on the internet. The production of the live performance on that was brilliant. And I had asked the director of the show if he would be interested in doing a video with the Doobies.
Yeah.
And he went to NBC and they said, your contract won't allow it. Sorry.
No.
Oh wow.
That made me really angry because that was whatever he did was so far ahead of its time.
Hmm.
It was brilliant. Whatever his vision was, that guy should have been out there doing music videos.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember it. I mean, I was what, 7, 8 years old at the time it came on. But no, I just remember that was a huge deal when that happened. And it was a 2-part episode. And yeah, it was big excitement at the time.
That
Yeah.
was a fun one.
It was fun to do.
Yeah. Okay. I'll limit myself to just one more. How did you end up working with Bob Weir on Where the Beat Meets the Street?
I got a call from Bob
Hmm.
asking me if I would be interested in producing a record for him. So I listened to the material and liked it. I said, sure, I'd love to, because I knew some of the players in the band anyway. I knew
Right.
Billy Cobham.
Right.
You know, so we did a lot of the record in my house.
Oh, wow.
in LA because someone, Stevens was the name of the gentleman who had designed a portable 24-track machine. So we just set up in my living room. And I think the Grateful Dead was very comfortable with that dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
So Bob had no problem at all with that. And we did a lot of it, in my house. And that was a fun record.
Mm. Yeah, Bob
Right
Weir's
there.
solo records don't get the attention they deserve a lot of times. People kind of overlook them, I think, but the songwriting on them are particularly interesting. So,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell us about working with Joni.
yes.
Hissing's one of my favorite
Hissings of
albums.
Summer
of hers.
Lawns, beautiful.
Yes.
Working with Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It makes me smile.
I bet.
So I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story that personifies working with Joni Mitchell. So Joni and I would occasionally have lunch together in a little restaurant in Brentwood, California. And one day I asked her, is it okay if I brought my godson? He was 10 years old, little TJ, who was the son of Slim Jim Phantom from the Stray Cats,
Stray Cats,
and Burt Eklund, both of whom were friends of mine. And so they'd gotten married and then, and they had this wonderful son, TJ. So TJ was my godson. And I said, okay, can I bring him with me? And she said, sure. So we had lunch, very nice lunch. And afterwards, and this is what I love about children, the way that they view things. He looked up at me after. I said, so TJ, do you have a good time? And he said, she's huge, beautiful. And I thought, talk about poetry.
Yeah.
Talk about lyric. Talk about a beautiful description of a beautiful person. And so, yes, my answer to you was she was huge, beautiful.
Yeah.
In all aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really nice to see her back out there.
That was wonderful.
I mean,
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
tears, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell me about the best. This is a super group you were briefly in that most people probably don't know about. It's Keith Emerson, John Entwistle, Simon Phillips,
Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh, of course. Yeah. I hear that
And,
kind of started with some jams that you guys were doing in LA.
Well, we were the house band at the China Club.
Yeah, I had Simon on a couple months ago and asked him about it, but he said he kind of got in the loop a little later.
Yeah, because Ainsley Dunbar was playing drums for a while, and then he went out to do something else. But we were the house band at the China Club. So everybody, Bruce Springsteen and Elton John, everybody wanted to play in the China Club because there was a pretty good rhythm section. And so Michael Jensen, the publicist, came in one day and said, we ought to do something with this. So I said, okay, what do you want to do? I said, well, let's organize it and take it to Japan and do 4 shows. Okay, well, we need a name. I said, well, let's call it The Best. What the hell? And nobody had a problem with that. So we rehearsed. And I think there are bits and pieces of it available for viewing on the internet.
Yeah, I know someone that has the whole thing on a DVD. I think
Right, which was, those live tapes were stolen. And we've never been able to find out who did it. And this stuff appears, whatever, hey, shit happens. But it was a lot of fun. And I think it was, I don't mean to be disingenuous or sound self-centered, but there was some killer playing on that.
Oh, yeah. And you know what I kind of delight in is seeing...
And we were reading it. I mean, I was reading it.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
We charted all this stuff out. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because Keith Emerson, I mean, when you're playing that stuff,
Yeah, you don't jam on that stuff. You
Yeah,
know
here,
it.
yeah, write it out. Let's do this.
Well,
You know.
that's one of the things I delighted in the most watching it was seeing you guys kind of play out of context. I mean, seeing Entwistle playing Bodhisattva, that was so cool, and playing
Oh
keys,
yeah.
and it's just like, there's more to these guys than you realize with their main bands, and it was really cool to see them kind of flex their
Well, and
muscles
having
in different
somebody like Keith
contexts.
Emerson, who was classically trained, I studied classical piano for 8 years. John Entwistle studied French horn, classical French horn. So it only seemed natural to take a song like Boris the Spider and then go into Jaws. And we did this at a rehearsal one time. I just started playing it, and John all over it. And Keith immediately had the right patch, the right sound. Doodle-doo, doodle-doo. I went, okay, so let's see what happens if we go into Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky. Bingo. Keith had already played the piece because he was very familiar with Mussorgsky. Anyway, and John knew it. He'd played the piece of music on the French horn. So that was an easy transition. And okay, let's go right into The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. No problema. Zooming into it. And then back into Boris the Spider. And when we did it live, the Japanese audience, they had no idea what was going on here. I mean, we had taken this jam concept right to the Oort cloud. And it was so satisfying. I mean, Keith being such a brilliant classical musician made all that work. It was fantastic.
He's one of the big progressive rock heavyweights. I was curious, were you a fan of any of that stuff? ELP, yes, Crimson, all that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I still love that stuff to this day, and I'm a big, I never miss a chance to talk about it. I love that music because it's so adventurous and eclectic.
We like adventure.
Yeah, heck yeah, I want to be surprised by music.
I mean, the first time that The Rite of Spring was performed in Paris, they ended up looting 6 blocks of Paris.
Caused a riot, yeah.
I gotta ask about that though. Some people think it was more inspired by the actual play than the music being played during it. What do you think?
I don't know. When Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor was first performed in a church, they burned the church to the ground. So it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Nothing like the Devil's Interval. Nothing like that. The dominant and
The third.
the flat five, right?
Yeah.
I gotta love that.
It's kind of interesting how that's evolved over the years. It seems so like the evilest interval ever, and nowadays it's been used so much. I think it's almost it's kind of taken the bite out of it. It's almost like over here the minor second's going, I'm even weirder.
Right.
Well, I collect the music that got people stirred to violence. Tommy Johnson, used to perform and busk on the street corners in New Orleans, and people thought his singing was so impassioned that the police arrested him for starting riots.
Tom Johnson from the
Yeah.
Doobie Brothers?
No, the singer, the blues singer.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. And Henry Cowell started a riot with one of his weird piano pieces, and Ornette Coleman used to get beat up on the street outside of the Fox spot. I love stuff. I love hearing stuff like that.
I think it's something to aspire to.
Well, and
Take your
jazz was
chances.
banned in the Soviet Union
Yeah.
because it epitomized freedom, and that was a no-no in a dictatorial state.
Right.
Anyway, gentlemen, I don't mean to be a buzzkill here. I've got a 11:30 Zoom call for my
Oh my
day
goodness,
job.
you've been so generous with your time and
No,
your
no, no.
stories.
I'm
Thank you
amazed
so
anybody
much.
cares what I have to say. Frankly, you all are very kind.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. And you've been such an inspiration over the years. It's just a real
No
treat to
doubt.
speak with you.
Well,
Yes.
is there anything else? I mean, I got like 4 minutes. Is there anything else that I mean, I don't want to, I didn't want to cut you off or leave you hanging.
No, no. Well, I know it's a big rabbit hole, but could you briefly give us a short version of how you got into missile defense?
Yeah.
Was the fact that you were a guitar player and kind of a tinkerer a catalyst at all for you learning about
Absolutely.
all that? I figured.
Because I reading all the defense magazines,
Hmm.
all the technology that was involved in it. Besides, a radar is just an electric guitar on steroids. Once you know the physics, you're good to go. So I just, for the hell of it, wrote a paper on converting a Navy air defense system to do missile defense. Gave it to a congressman buddy of mine that I was working for, who gave it to the vice chairman of the Armed Services Committee, House Armed Services Committee, who called the Congress, other congressmen back and said, what is this guy with Raytheon or Boeing? Lockheed or something? No, he's a guitar player for the Doobie Brothers. So I get a call from the vice chairman saying, would you be willing to accept the position on the House Armed Services Committee on Missile Defense? I said, sure. and away we go. So,
Awesome.
That's amazing.
well, Brian May, right,
Yeah.
has a PhD in astrophysics. And in
Yeah.
2 weeks, I'm going to go accept the Hedy Lamarr Award.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, and Hedy Lamarr
Congratulations.
came up with the frequency hopping radio, the idea
Exactly.
of
The
spread spectrum.
technology that makes
Her
Wi-Fi
husband was
possible.
a physicist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I know, not that weird. Weird, but not that weird.
Yeah.
The leap happens sometimes. Yeah. That's awesome.
Hey.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And
Thank you, gentlemen, for having
any
me
chance
today.
you might make it down to Atlanta with your band?
Yes. As a matter of
well-
fact, I believe we're already looking at sometime in the second week in June.
Oh, really? Well, we'd love to come down and meet you in person and see the
It'd be
show.
my pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch.
Okie doke.
All right.
All right.
Take
Thank you, Jeff.
All right.
Take care.
See you.